Good evening. Welcome back to the Return Homestead. My name is Mike, and my wife Marty and I homestead 50 acres in southeastern Kentucky. On those 50 acres, we have a 2001 Fleetwood mobile home. Now, it's a little dated, it's a little worn down, so we're doing a remodel. That's what we're here to look at today. It's been a few days since we started putting the drywall up. We were actually working on the electrical in the last video. We do have quite a bit of footage for you on putting the drywall up. We're going to take a look at that today. And we're going to take a look at this electrical outlet for the dryer. So we're going to start there and get this sorted, and then we'll get on to the drywall. So this is the problem I had with the dryer's electrical. Typically, wires are landed in a box that's inside of the wall, and then they would come through and out to an outlet. This wire penetrates through the drywall directly. So there is a clip on the back of the outlet plate where the wire passes through, and then the wires are landed into these different posts, and then there's a cover that goes over the top of it. I thought I'd run down to Lowe's, buy a new one of these, and possibly even a junction box to put inside of this wall. Lowe's doesn't make anything that looks even remotely like this. There was nothing on the shelves that was even close. So I'm going to go ahead and make use of this outlet. Now, the one concern that I have is we are kind of tight on the length of the wire. There's not a whole lot to work with here. There's not a service loop inside of the wall that would give us some wiggle room. And we're going to be putting a 1/2 inch of drywall on this, and then also up to 3/4 of an inch of additional wood for the shiplap we're going to be putting over it. So I'm going to have to be really careful in managing what wire I have here. But for right now, this is the last piece of drywall on this wall that we need to put in. So we're going to go ahead and take measurements and cut this piece of drywall. I'll probably go ahead and use my paddle bits just to push a clean hole through the drywall where that wire is going to come out. So let's get cutting. So be ready for things to go a little bit wrong. It's not all going to be perfect. Remember, you're a DIYer, you're a homesteader, you're fixing your own place. You're not on the clock. You don't have to get it perfect every time. When I was looking at either drywalling this wall or this wall first, I decided on this one to make sure I'd have enough drywall backing to screw off the next sheet into. Because if I put this one on first, it would have pushed it out another 1/2 inch. I didn't look at this wall though, and there's not enough drywall backing here. Simple solution, grab another 2x3, toenail another stud in. Problem solved. So we have another opportunity to use the paddle bits. We need a hole for that wire to pass through that's going to be in the bottom of this drywall. I want a nice clean hole, nothing rough or jagged. So I am going to use a paddle bit to push that through. I'll probably go ahead and use that same 7/8 bit. Once we got that in the drill, we just need to measure and mark where we're going to be drilling. So I've measured this out, and we are going to be 15 inches from this wall, 8 inches off the ground. The drywall is going to sit a 1/2 inch up off of the floor. So that'll be 7.5 inches from the bottom of the drywall. Make a little mark here at 7.5. And then we're going to be 15 inches in from the left-hand edge. Right about there is where we want our hole. This doesn't have to be perfect. There is a little bit of slack on the wire. It should be just enough for me to be able to make this work. So I'm going to put this through with a paddle bit. Whenever you're using a paddle bit on a piece of sheet good like this, think about what's underneath. We don't want to drill a hole through the floor, just through the drywall. So I'll get that hole started. Lift the drywall up a little bit. We have a nice clean hole for the wire to pop through. And say hello to Sunshine. She's my electrical helper for the day. She doesn't really hang drywall. Her arms are a little bit too short. So oftentimes you're going to need an extra set of hands. You may not have an extra set, or you're trying to work on two sides of a sheet of drywall. Don't forget about using leverage. So I need to be able to lift this up a little bit from below in order for it to get a nice snug fit there in the middle. So I'm going to get a screw started here in the corner. And lift that up. Push it in place. Just need one more screw on the other side to hold it. And once again, a little leverage up, screw it off. So often when you're dealing with drywall, one of the concerns is making sure that you don't waste any. When you have those cut off little pieces that aren't quite long enough to cover something, it's okay to piece it together. Now, if you're making a complete wall and it's all going to be visible, you want to be careful about how many seams you have in it. This wall is going to get covered with shiplap, so we're not really worried about all the seams that might be there. So we're using a small cutoff piece. We're going to use another small cutoff to finish filling in this section and save ourselves a full sheet of drywall. When you're thinking about reusing small cutoff pieces of your drywall, this can happen sometimes too. When we cut this piece off, we discovered there was a flaw in the drywall. Could have been something very heavy was dropped on it, but it had a crack in it either way. But the shortest section is slightly longer than the piece that we need, so we can still make use of the vast majority of this sheet of drywall. So measuring out from that right-hand edge to where we just installed that last piece of drywall, we're 27 5/8 inches. And the short side of this broken piece is right at 29.5. So we can use this to go ahead and fill that gap. 27 5/8. Never hurts to stop and double check a measurement from time to time. We need this to be 35 3/4, and once again we're slightly longer. It's a little bit more difficult to shave a sheet of drywall when you're under 2 inches. I'll give you some clues on that here in just a second when we cut this one down to size. All right, so we need to take just about 1/2 inch off of the edge of this sheet of drywall. You can see the line is really close to the edge of the drywall. That's going to make it really hard to get any leverage on it. The first thing you want to do is make sure you cut this very deep. You want to run your blade across that 3 or 4 times. Make sure you get a good cut down deep into the drywall. And then all we need to do is increase our leverage a little bit. Probably one of the easiest ways to do that is to grab a piece of scrap. Line that up with where your cut is, and then you can just go by and pop that right off. And then just like we've done before, take your knife and cut the paper on the reverse side. Chances are when you do this, you're going to end up with a little bit of a jagged edge. Don't worry about it. The tape and mud guys will fix any of those little flaws. If you want it nice and clean so it fits snugly, once again, just like a cheese grater, run your blade backward across there. And smooth off all those bumps. Good to go. We cut this piece out of a piece of scrap that might typically have been thrown away. You never want to waste this drywall. It's not terribly expensive as a building material, but there's no sense paying for full sheets of drywall to cover just a small section. Now, if you're worried about this jagged edge here in the corner, don't. Like I keep telling you, the tape and mud guys are going to take care of all of those little problems when they come in here to tidy things up. Now, of course, Marty and I are the tape and mud guys, but we'll show you guys how to do it. So we've got a room that is almost finished. We've got drywall all the way around, except for this one last wall. This is where the door is and where that light switch was that we were working on. And we want to get some insulation into this wall. We don't want to leave it completely empty. We're not concerned about maintaining temperature in this space or the spaces next to it, but we do want to cut down on the sound that's traveling through this wall. So we're going to shove some insulation up in here. We're going to use a standard R13 bat. Those are cut to a 16-inch on-centered stud. Obviously these aren't 16 inches, so I'll show you how we manage that. Please keep in mind this is not an insulation video, it's a drywall video, but we do need to get insulation into this wall. If you're going to be hanging a lot of this insulation, you might want to protect yourself a little bit better than I am. I'd recommend long sleeve shirts. Definitely want to have a mask to cover your face. This is a fiberglass insulation, it's the pink stuff. There's also a rock wool, it's a brown insulation. Both of them are itchy, both of them will make you cough, wheeze, and sneeze. So if you're sensitive in any way, make sure you've got a mask on. I'm just going to go ahead and cut this to size. And we've got a bay that is about 8 1/4 inches. This is not like doing drywall, it's insulation. So if I cut this at 8 1/2 inches, it's going to get a nice tight fit. And I don't need to draw lines or anything. I'm just going to go off with the line that's here on the paper. I just want to make a cut through it. Once through the paper, then we're going to go all the way to the floor and cut through the insulation. If you can get one of those long bladed knives, they're a lot easier for doing this work. You can just compress the insulation, and if you're on subfloor like this, it'll cut nice and clean. So installing insulation into a stud bay is not that big a deal. You're really just going to stuff it in here. Now you will have to pay particular attention to things like switches. If you need to go around a switch, you just grab your knife, find approximately where that is, make a couple of cuts in the insulation, and sort of make yourself a little nest for the switch to fit into. Remember, we're not trying to insulate this for temperature control. It's just about density inside of the wall, so we want to control noise. It's going to be a little snug with those wires in there, but it'll fit just fine for our purposes. All right, beyond that, it gets kind of boring and repetitive. I'm just going to cut the rest of the insulation. We'll go ahead and fill in this cavity, and then we'll get a sheet of drywall cut to go over the opening. All of the insulation is inserted into the stud bays. All that's left to do now is cut the drywall and put it up on the wall. We'll need to make sure we take care of the switch. The box is already mounted, our wires are in place, and we'll just roto-zip the hole out when it comes time so that it'll punch through the drywall. So we could cut a sheet of drywall that would fit only to the edge of the door frame, but then that's going to leave us with a seam right here across the header. One of the easiest ways to handle doors and windows is to simply hang a sheet of drywall across it, and then I'll use my roto-zip to actually cut out the door frame. That'll get our drywall right to the edge of the framing. We will actually end up with a large section that gets cut off, but if you make all of these small cuts, you're going to end up wasting that drywall anyway. So we've got our spacers down on the floor in order to help us get a good accurate measurement. We're just going to place the tape on top of that and measure to the ceiling. We're at 83 3/4, 83 1/2 we'll call it. And of course we've got to remember to take care of our wall switch here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a measurement out from the wall. And it looks like we're about 11 1/2 inches to the center of that box. I'm going to write that over here. So we'll have that measurement ready for us, and we'll measure down from the ceiling, and we're at 37 1/2. That'll tell us where to punch through with the roto-zip so we can get this box cleaned out. And yet again, we've got another interesting problem to solve. The sheet of drywall that I need to hang up is longer than the room is, so there's no way to get it into the room. It is wider than the door frame, so there's no way to walk it in already flat and stand it up. The simplest way I could think of to solve this problem is simply cut the drywall straight down the middle. Once it's cut in half, we'll be able to hang the top half, then the bottom half, and we'll have a seam that we'll have to tape and mud, but that's for the tape and mud guys to worry about. So this is the RotoZip. It may look a little bit like a drill. That may look like a drill bit. It is not. That is actually a saw bit. So the saw does go in only one direction. You want to cut in a clockwise direction around whatever you're cutting. That allows all the drywall to fall out and not get bogged up inside of the saw. All we're going to do now is just set it in here so that it runs through the drywall and right up against the framing. And then we'll be able to follow the framing around and zip this right out. It's going to get a little dusty. And this is why I like to use the RotoZip. You get a nice clean edge right along the door frame. Cuts everything nice and straight if you know how to use your RotoZip well. Occasionally you get a little bit of a weirdness where the blade kind of gets out of control. But tape and mud guys will fix that later. So we've measured 37 inches down from the ceiling. 11.5 inches over from this wall. We got a little mark here where we believe the center of our box to be. Hopefully we're right on center. So I'm going to go in here, move off to the left until I hit the edge of the box. Then I'll pull the blade out, drop it back in on the outside of the box, and RotoZip the outside. All right, you can see where the RotoZip got a little out of control here, went out a little bit into the drywall. Not a big deal. The switch plate's going to cover all that when we're done. I may clean that up with a little mud when we're taping and mudding, but for all intents and purposes, that's perfect. And just like that, we have a completed room. Now the room itself is not finished. We will be turning this back into a fully functional laundry room. But we do have all of the drywall hung. We still need to put a bunch of the screws in. Marty's working on cleaning up the door frame right now, and she'll be adding screws to this drywall behind me over the next couple of days. Once all those screws are in place, we'll go on to address the lighting. So we're going to be replacing this fixture and adding some slimline can lights in here, the LEDs that'll give us lots of good light in here. After that, it'll be time to tape and mud and sand and mud and sand. There's a lot of that work to do. So we do have a really unique way of putting texture up on the walls. It's using something you already have in the house around you. So we'll be showing you that when we get around to putting texture on. Then it'll be time to paint, and we'll be getting close to finishing the laundry room at that point. And as the sun goes down, it's time for a little porch time. Don't forget to return to life while you're doing all this labor on your land. We do appreciate you visiting with us again tonight. We do hope you'll subscribe, and please hit that like button while you have the window open. We'll see you next time.